Hey y'all, it's me, Lynzie, your host of the Love by Lynzie podcast. How are you guys doing? I am really happy to be here and excited to be hanging out with you for another episode today where we are going to be talking all about micro weddings. Yes, we have been forced to go small. But I want to explore with you, is that a bad thing? Can a small wedding be a big celebration? And how do you know if a micro wedding is right for you? I think that's a question that a lot of couples have been struggling with. And here's the thing. Over the past 4 years, we've been running my company, the Pop-Up Chapel Co., and we started running chapels in August of 2017 as a one-off trial. And if you don't know about the Pop-Up Chapel Co., we're a shared wedding concept, right? Where we marry 10 couples in one day, one couple on the hour, every hour for 10 hours straight. And when we first started this, experiment, I'll say, we didn't know that it would lead to an actual business. But I just had this feeling in my gut that there was an entire group of couples out there who were being underserved, right? There was nothing in the wedding market for couples who wanted something small and something easy, but still gorgeous and awesome. So your choices at that time were literally a quick and dirty elopement at City Hall or something similar, or like an all-out balls to the wall wedding that cost you tens of or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there was nothing in between. And we learned really quickly that these two sizes of weddings certainly did not fit all couples. And yes, there were indeed many couples who want something small, but still beautiful. So fast forward 4 years to a time of COVID, and now small really seems to be the only option that we'll be left with for a while. Now, I am a firm believer that you're going to have the wedding that you dreamed about having no matter what, right? Like if you know that you don't want a small wedding, you're going to postpone your wedding for a year from now. Maybe you've already postponed your wedding to whatever time of year feels comfortable to you. And also, if you didn't want a big wedding, maybe COVID is giving you the permission to go small, right? Like maybe all of a sudden you're like, aha, I don't have to do what my mom says. I don't have to do what my aunt says, and I can have a small wedding. And so if that's you, power to you, because this is your moment to get married. So small weddings are a thing now, right? Small weddings are a thing, and they're going to be a thing for a while, but I want to be clear about something. A small wedding, a small event does not negate style. It does not negate quality, and it certainly does not negate streamlined planning. No way. No way. I think that those become more important than ever, actually. So more than ever, I really believe couples are going to need planners' help, right? Because we're navigating uncharted territory, and it has become our responsible as the professionals to do the groundwork and to lead the way. So what is a micro wedding? And how do you plan it? What makes it different from an elopement? Well, let's start there. A micro wedding is a new concept, right? But it's recently been defined as an intimate ceremony and reception that has a guest list of 50 people or less. So I think that whole 50-person guest list is really the micro wedding threshold. Often these intimate events still offer food, drink, decor, and details that are found in a traditional wedding, but just smaller in scale. Now that's the best definition of a micro wedding that I could find out there, and it seems like a lot of industry professionals agree on that definition. So obviously, a micro wedding, where do you start? The first thing that you have to do is tackle that guest list. 50 people or less sounds pretty intimidating, but you can totally do this, right? It's not that hard. Micro wedding guest lists are usually made up of immediate family, like parents, siblings, partners, close aunts and uncles, and then also your absolute closest friends and their partners. Distant relations, coworkers, acquaintances, they don't make the cut. It's not happening. And writing these smaller guest lists can be extremely hard. And I promise you, I know. My grandfather had 11 brothers and sisters, and they all had partners and kids. So I really feel you on cutting the guest list down. It's not easy. However, what I find really amazing is that with the permission COVID is giving us to go small, 50 or under actually becomes quite simple. Most of our clients are saying that it was either, 35 people or 150 people. And it's almost as if the next tier, I'm doing like bunny like quotes with my fingers right now, the next tier of closeness out from those 35 people becomes a much larger net where your guest list, they kind of score the same. Now, how are you supposed to go about cutting down your guest list? And I have a really dark tip for you. So go with me here. But I want you to ask yourself this question. If you were going to die tomorrow and you had one day to make calls to the people that you love and say goodbye, who would you call? Who would you spend like an hour with on the phone? I promise you this list is shorter than 15 people. So if both you and your partner make that list and then you add the people on that list, you add their partners, you've got your micro wedding guest list. I know that's like a really bleak tip, but like ask yourself the opposite question. If I were going to get married tomorrow and I wanted to have like the best party of my life, that list would be so long, and it's really not the point of this exercise. So we're trying to whittle it down. Sorry for the dark moment, but I do think it's a good tip. I think it's going to help you really narrow down that guest list. At Love by Lynzie, which is our wedding planning and design company here in Toronto, we are offering event packages based on guest count. And in order for small businesses to make these smaller functions make sense, there are guest count limits. So what I'm saying is we're offering micro wedding packages. I should be a bit clearer. And those packages are a base price based on the amount of guests that you're bringing. So I know that a lot of planners out there are doing this right now, and I believe these limits stem from the amount of hours and work that go into planning these smaller events. We're trying to keep it simple and we're trying to keep it concise. So in order to meet these smaller guest counts and not exceed them, one big tip I would be to tier your guest list and literally only invite the 50 or less guests that you know you want to attend. In a regular wedding situation, you would probably send out, if you were having like 100, 200 person wedding, you'd probably send out a lot of invites and expect that a percentage of those people would RSVP no. In this case, I'm advising the opposite. Invite the first 50 people or whatever that number is that you know you want to attend, and wait for RSVPs to come back before you invite anyone else. If there's room, you could maybe invite a couple more. However, never tell anybody that they're on your B list. I know you wouldn't, but I'm just saying it for due diligence. Honestly, for a micro wedding, being on the B list begs the question if you invite that person at all. It's like such a small group, you are for sure going to spend time with them that night. So really consider who you want there. Okay, moving on to actual planning. Where are you going to host your micro wedding? What is your venue? Smaller guest counts is cool because it actually means your world of venues opens up drastically. Micro weddings, in my opinion, are best hosted in non-traditional venues like warehouses and cafes, restaurants, art galleries, or even like retail and pop-up storefronts that might become available to you. For anybody listening, there's a really, for anybody planning, I should say, because you're all listening, I hope, there's a really great website out there called This Open Space, thisopenspace.com. And the whole website is just atypical event spaces where people are just like renting out their open space to whoever wants to rent it out. And a lot of those spaces allow weddings and events, and those spaces I think would be mint for micro weddings. Many of our clients who are doing micro weddings are also just having them in family homes and residences, like in the backyard or under tents, because at the end of the day, a smaller group means a smaller spatial footprint. So the incredible thing about a lot of these spaces also that you might rent or your backyard is that they're already often beautifully designed and decorated as is. Like think of, I'm thinking of my favorite Mexican restaurant downtown, and it's like super quirky and colorful and there's neon lights. And so I think a lot of these spaces often have so much character, which is going to save you time and money on design. At the end of the day, picking a venue first is a must. You need to know where your celebration will take shape, and then all other details will fall into place after this. At Love by Lynzie, as I mentioned before, we have created these 2 all-inclusive micro wedding packages that we think cover the needs of most of our wedding clients who are doing a micro wedding. And we've listened to these needs and we've learned what's important to people over time, especially through our experience with the Pop-Up Chapel Co. And one of the first considerations that we go through with our clients is always, where is the wedding going to be held? If it's not on a private property, we are, of course, going to suggest like some of our preferred venues and walk our clients through the pros and cons of renting out a non-traditional space. And it really does all come down to budget, which leads me perfectly to my next point. You think I maybe wrote notes on this or something, but micro wedding budgets can be mega confusing. And one of the biggest reasons why, and full transparency on this one, is that the industry is still figuring out exactly what micro weddings cost and like how to make them work. Like the industry as a whole has just been thrust into this process of planning micro weddings. And if you weren't doing it consistently before, it's tricky to know how much they're going to cost and how much time you're going to spend on them and how much it's going to cost the couple and how much it's actually going to cost the businesses that are, making these micro weddings happen. So how many man hours will go into planning a 30-person wedding versus a 100-person wedding? Is it the same? My intuition says likely yes. But the tricky part here is that the couple, and if you're a couple, maybe you're going to agree with me on this, but the couple likely won't value the service at the same rate or cost that they would a 100-person wedding, right? Like they'll probably think, well, it's 30 people. Like it definitely shouldn't, obviously it shouldn't be the same price in total, but I mean like the value per person, I don't think that they're going to value it at the same rate. They're going to see it as something that's like budget friendly and something that they can do now so that they can have a big wedding later maybe. So how do you create a process that honors the work of the event professionals, right? But also aligns with the price point that the client wants to spend? I don't really have all the answers to that question yet, but because it is still a new process for a lot of people. But I think we start with education. I think brides and grooms out there don't know a lot about micro weddings and what goes into them and the planning process. So here is how our micro wedding budget planning situation is netting out. Specific costs are going to be flat rate costs no matter what. And that won't depend on guest count. So you won't expect to save a lot of money on these flat rate types of vendors, right? Flat rate vendors are things like your photographer, your live music, your bands, your hair and makeup, the officiant. These vendors are charging for a service that really doesn't matter how many guests show up. So their costs are going to be more dependent on like the length of service and the quality of service that they're offering you. Flat rate vendors, they are only able to be flexible with their costs when their workload is lessened. So instead of shooting for 8 hours, a photographer, for example, instead of shooting for 8 hours, they would shoot for 3. Or a band, instead of performing 3 60-minute sets of music, maybe they only perform for 2. And they are also able to be flexible with their rates when micro weddings are occurring on the days of the week that don't compete with larger bookings, like Sunday to Thursdays, right? Like the more you can be flexible with the day of the week that you get married, the better. At the beginning of the pandemic, I saw this awesome meme on Instagram that said, maybe Wednesdays are the new black for weddings. And that's not a bad thing. And I was like, yeah, I'm into Wednesday weddings. I'm into Monday weddings. I'm into Tuesday weddings. And I think that's going to allow your flat rate vendor specifically to be more flexible and more competitive with their rates. This episode of the Love by Lynzie podcast is brought to you by Kismet Creative Wedding Films. Mark at Kismet Creative reached out to me a few years ago, and my team has been working with him ever since. Kismet Creative produces stunningly beautiful wedding films filled with heart and soul, and they are always just perfectly polished production-wise. They see weddings as a perfect opportunity to make a film about you. And what do I always say? Weddings should really be about you. Your wedding film is about documenting a turning point in your history and freezing in time a unique experience that becomes a memory so quickly. Kismet is passionate about creating a film that will become just as important to your kids and your grandkids as it is to you. Kismet Creative is based in Toronto, Canada, but they film weddings everywhere and are available worldwide. So if you're looking for a wedding videography team, look no further. Head to kismetcreative.ca today to book Mark and his amazing team for your wedding. Kismet Creative, KISMET creative.ca. I want to personally thank Mark for filming some of the Love by Lynzie podcast episodes on video. You can head over to YouTube and search the Love by Lynzie podcast, and you'll find a few episodes there too. I'll link to Kismet Creative there as well. All right, let's get back to the episode. Going back to talking about all the things that we've learned about budgeting, you as the client will save money on the things that depend on your overall guest count. So things like booze, food, number of centerpieces, number of chairs, number of tables that you have to rent, number of service staff that you need, and so on. So the fewer guests that you have, the lower your overall budget will be, as you won't require as much product to come in. And your most effective way of spending will be to work with a team that has set priced packages. I have learned this after doing a lot of research, and this is how we're doing it at Love by Lynzie. We've created a streamlined menu of items, designs, and literally delicious food that we feel reaches a really broad spectrum of clients and also makes it a super simple planning process. Clients literally look at that sort of menu of options, choose what they want, and then the whole situation is planned already. And this menu creates less need for continuous communication between the clients, and it's more of a streamlined step-by-step client journey, right? So that cuts down on our labor, and subsequently, it allows us to keep our service rates reasonable. It also allows our vendors to streamline their process by offering a select number of service choices, and that is helping keeping their rates reasonable as well. And with this type of micro wedding planning structure, couples will save time and energy, but vendors save time and energy too. And that's how you keep the cost for the value that you're receiving. That's how you keep the cost a little bit lower. It's also how vendors are going to be able to scale up the amount of events that they can do. The more streamlined that micro wedding planning process is, the more micro weddings that they're going to be able to take on, right? So lastly, a misconception overall about micro weddings is that they will certainly be cheaper. For sure they will if you stay under 50 guests, but the cost per guest is likely going to be higher than a large wedding. So you can't simply say, well, I was going to spend 50 grand for 100 guests, so now I'm only going to spend 10 grand for 20 guests. It's likely not going to net out that way because of all those flat rate vendors that I was talking about. And right now, like to give you a bit of a benchmark, right now our couples are inviting anywhere from 16 to 40 people to their micro weddings, and they're spending anywhere from like $8,000 to $30,000 on their micro wedding day. And your micro wedding budget is always going to be heavily influenced by your personal style and need. So again, these are just guidelines based on my experience. But at the end of the day, what your style is, what your needs are, that is going to determine your budget. Now, after you've chosen your venue, after you've made your guest list, after you've budgeted, what do you really need for a micro wedding? In my opinion, a great party needs good food, great music, and drinks. Great lighting and beautiful moments help too. I don't really believe a micro wedding needs to be complicated, but I do believe you need to put some thought into how you're going to elevate it from just a regular dinner party, because it's not that. It's a wedding. After years in the industry, what I've learned is all you really need for a wedding is an officiant, a marriage license, and 2 witnesses. After that, it's all gravy, right? Like you don't really need anything else. But let's look at the formats that you can plan for a micro wedding. So a really popular format that we're finding with our clients right now is cocktail style. It's casual. You're going to spend a lot less on decor. You're going to spend less on food, and the entire experience will be shorter. So that's going to help with those flat rate vendor situations. For decor, for setup, you're only going to need things like cruiser tables, maybe a few bar stools, a bar. And for decor, you might need, candles for the tables in the evenings, maybe some like simple bud vases on the cruisers. And I always recommend 1 or 2 show-stopping floral pieces. because flowers are awesome, like a big floral on the welcome table or a big floral on the bar. And I think that's sort of where you're at with like cocktail style. Like you are going to keep it really simple with that style of event. The second one that's quite popular right now for micro weddings is a lot more formal. It is a seated dinner. Usually this is 3 courses or more, including a starter, a main course, and a dessert. And that's going to require more decor and more rental. So it will be more expensive in that sense too. It's not just the food. You'll need more decor, right? You think centerpieces and more candles. If you've got tables, you've got to fill that up with something beautiful. You'll need chairs and plates and glassware and flatware. And you can get really fancy with your tables too. You can upgrade your napkins and your linens, and you can include chargers. So the sky is really the limit once you're doing a sit-down dinner. And that is going to obviously increase your budget. So it all comes down to, again, your style, your needs, what your priorities are. There is another option you can do. You can do something in between the seated dinner and the cocktail style. You can basically do like mini past meals or food stations. And that's going to kind of net you somewhere in between. You will need a bar. And honestly, my principle here with micro weddings is keep it simple, stupid. Beer, wine, and sparkling wine is totally fine. And if you go this route, you can do a lot of your alcohol self-served, which is going to cut down costs on labor, right? Like you can just put beer on ice in a big, beautiful galvanized tub. People can serve themselves a bottle of beer, and that's going to cut down on, bartenders and service staff. A more formal bar for a micro wedding would have a bartender serving beer and wine and sparkling. And honestly, here's one kind of sneaky little event industry tip. When you have a bartender, instead of allowing people to self-serve for small events, your booze is actually going to go a lot further because it's properly rationed and it's served responsibly by a server. We've all seen it. Like somebody goes up to a self-serve wine bar and they pour the wine to the top of the glass. That's not going to happen if you have a bartender. A bartender is going to pour like a proper 5-6 ounce glass of wine. So your alcohol is going to go further. If you do want to go the route of having mixed drinks, I definitely highly recommend choosing 1 to 2 cocktails and sticking with that only. Having a full bar rail will only lead to so much wasted alcohol because with such a small group, a bottle will be opened and people will have like 2 shots or something from that bottle, and it is not worth it. Plus you have to buy all that like garnish and mix to provide like a full bar, like cranberry juice and orange juice and ginger ale and all this stuff. So it is a kind of a pain in the ass. You'll have to rent a ton of different styles of glassware as well. So for small groups, it is really much better, in my opinion, to serve a curated bar menu. It's more efficient for you. It's more cost effective. Your budget, your bartender, in all of those senses, it just seems more thoughtful to your guests when it looks like you've actually taken the time to curate your bar menu. And then lastly, you're going to need some type of setup for your ceremony, right? Like since the place that you're having your micro wedding is likely smaller, one tip here is to have your ceremony backdrop play double duty, whatever you choose to do. And there are so many options. You could do an arch, a floral installation, a backdrop. The options are endless. You want to have this large decor piece that you have for the ceremony play double duty. So maybe it becomes a photo op after, or the backdrop for like your sweetheart table at dinner or something after. Whatever it is, make sure that your investment in your ceremony decor lasts the entire night for a micro wedding. Staffing is also something you're really going to want to consider as well. Having a server there to clean up empty glassware, clear tables, and replenish beer and wine when it needs chilling, like these are all things you don't want to talk about. And with COVID and all of the extra health and safety protocols, I really do think there is a lot of value in having a staff member there on site who is dedicated to disinfecting high-touch services, and ensuring that your staff is following COVID protocols as well, like having guests sanitize their hands when they walk in, or making sure your staff are wearing masks and disinfecting their hands, or disinfecting washrooms in between uses. This is super important in today's world. And every planner, I mean this, needs to have a health and safety protocol discussion with their client. And couples also need to be considering this for guests too. I highly recommend that couples also be notifying guests in advance of the health and cleaning precautions that they're taking, because people want to know. People want to know that they can feel safe and considered at your event, and that you actually are being careful. There is literally so much more that I could go on about with micro wedding plannings, and we honestly haven't even touched design yet. There are going to be so many episodes in this podcast about design, so I feel like listen to those and they'll apply to your micro wedding planning situation as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please do come back and listen to those. What I've really learned about micro wedding planning is that, honestly, micro weddings are weddings. It's not really anything different. They do take careful planning. It doesn't really matter if you're planning for 30 people or for 300 people. It's mostly the same categories that you need to cover. So my advice is the same with any size wedding. Start with your budget, start with your guest list, choose your venue, then look at the style of event that you want to throw and prioritize based on your needs and wants. At Love by Lynzie, we've created 2 amazing micro wedding packages that we really hope speak to couples. One is a cocktail wedding format, and that package is called Love and Libations. The other is a sit-down catered meal. It's a more formal option, and we call that one Marriage and a Meal. Yes, I know. I really like alliteration when I'm naming stuff. And both obviously would begin with a beautiful and intimate ceremony. Because micro weddings are small, I think we automatically associate them with less expensive and easier or simpler to plan. So we truly have simplified the planning process with a very step-by-step journey that lets you choose and then chill the F out so that you can just enjoy that planning experience. So if you're a couple out there who's listening and who's considering a micro wedding, I'd love to chat with you. Visit our website, lovebylynzie.com. You can check us out there. You can check out the micro wedding packages there and just drop us a line. That's it for me today, guys. Thank you again for tuning in. This is literally getting more fun with every episode that I record. I'm feeling more comfortable. I hope you will come back again. I really hope you will. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Love by Lynzie podcast. If you're walking away empowered and excited to plan, we'd love you to hit subscribe and then share our podcast with your friends. And if you want to keep the conversation going, head over to Instagram and share a comment, or let me know what you want me to cover in a future episode at Love by Lynzie or at lovebylynzie.events. Have fun planning, and we'll see you next time.